Welcome to Authentic Educators, a podcast for teachers by teachers. My name's Dave Brown, and I'm here with Cody Crook, my co-host, and we are joined by somebody that may or may not have been one of my college roommates, Anthony Benvenuto, who we were just talking, the three of us, and we think Anthony might be our first special education-centric guest that we've hosted on the show, so we're really excited. Anthony, glad to have you here.
Yeah, guys, thanks for having me. Good to
So
be here.
Anthony and I, we chatted a few weeks ago on the phone, and we were talking a lot about special education. One thing Anthony's going to bring up today has really resonated with me since we spoke, and it was this idea of knowledge, skill, and will gaps. So we're going to get into that in a moment. But before we do that, Anthony, you've been a special education teacher for 14 years. You've taught in multiple states. You've taught in both public and private schools and charter schools, or maybe public and charter, I should have said. You are also a coach of sorts for special education teachers. So you bring a lot of experience to the table. And I know you've worked with nonprofits in Nashville, Tennessee. Why don't you give a 30-second bio about some of your work?
Yeah, thanks, dude. Yeah, you hit it. Public, private, and charter. Started in public school in New Jersey, moved into private school for specifically for students with disabilities. And then now I'm at a public charter school in Nashville, Tennessee. I'm in my fifth year there, and for the past 2 years, yeah, I've also been coaching some of our newer special education teachers. A lot of the students that I have worked with throughout my career have um, had just like behavior challenges, social emotional challenges that come with disability classification. So working with, social emotional learning has kind of just always been rooted in what I've been doing naturally through my work.
Great. And I think on our phone conversation, and I feel like Cody and I have said this to every guest we've spoken to at this point, we've really had this through line,
Mhm.
and it ties to this idea of social and emotional learning. It seems as if everything we end up talking about somehow stems back to that or is rooted somewhere, somehow in that idea. It seems like your current situation, that's especially important. Remind me, the school you're at, it has a lot of, is it Teach for America candidates, or what's the
Yeah,
nature of the school
we
you're at now?
Yeah, we have that's historically been we've had a lot of Teach for America candidates. I don't know statistically how much that has lingered through the past few years, but I know my early years, yes, and in the early years of the organization because we're still relatively young. But we do, especially with Nashville being kind of the transplant city that it's becoming, we get a lot of people that are moving from out of state, from different places. We get a lot of people who are fresh right out of college too.
Yep.
So lots of people with varied experiences and just coming from different backgrounds, which is cool.
And so it's interesting there, is I'm sure at a school like that, there's such a need for somebody like you who has some time, some experience, and can actually coach teachers, because there is a lot that it's called the curse of knowledge. Like, we do what we do well, and we just think that everybody knows how to do certain things. But the reality is it takes a long time to learn a lot of best practices and for them to internalize. And there is like almost explicit instruction needed. And I'm sure that's a lot of, I think, what the nonprofit work has been tied to. So why don't we
Mm.
cut into really what brought us together today, which was this idea that was related to the knowledge, skill, and will gap, which I think is going to be the title of this episode because it sounds great. So why don't you talk about that?
I'm
Yeah, for
excited. I
sure.
haven't heard anything about this, so I am your audience right now, Anthony.
Oh, I love it. Yeah, I mean, for me, just even this framework, it feels, and I feel like as educators, this is what we're always doing. We're always doing like a gap analysis in real time in our classes, like who's getting what we want them to get, who's not, and why. And so uh, for me, everything is rooted, whether it's a neurodiverse student, whether it's a multilingual learner, whether it's a student in the general education setting, a neurotypical student, it's all behavior is a form of communication. So everything that we see, I mean, not just from our students, but like humans in general, everything we see is them trying to communicate something in some way, whether they're conscious of it or not.
Hmm.
And that obviously the expression of that is going to vary with depending on the age level that we're teaching with or that we're teaching. And so what kind of brought this idea is like a behavior intervention strategy, like classroom management, and even just like an educational mindset for me was the work that I did with a nonprofit here in Nashville a few years ago. They're called the Diverse Learners Cooperative. Um, the executive director was actually like a founding special education teacher at my school. And before she branched off and did this, but they have a teacher leader fellowship that they do where they bring in different diverse learner educators from around the city. And it's a 1 year fellowship where essentially within your school community, you identify an impact project focus area, something that you want to, grow and develop within your own community that is rooted in a gap right now. You see an issue within your school system and you want to change it. And so they walk you through that process, really help you kind of build the leadership skills to become a change maker within your school, regardless of how much experience you have, regardless of your role, and really try and like build that empowerment.
Sounds
And
like a
so,
living thesis, right? Like if you're pursuing
mhm.
your doctorate, you're analyzing something, but here you're kind of almost a step further than that by being living in the environment that you're analyzing.
Oh, for sure. And it was really cool. I could say this was like a professional trajectory changing experience for me. But so yeah, ultimately it's the knowledge, will, and skill gap is just this idea that again is rooted in all behavior is communication. And I think as educators, it's really easy for us to jump to the will gap. And I'll kind of start there. It's easy for us to say, like, the kid doesn't want to do the thing I want them to do. And that's the
Yeah,
way it presents, right? That's how we see it.
sure.
With whatever desired, undesired behaviors we're seeing in the classroom, it feels like, gosh, I just don't want to do it.
Write the
We're just
essay,
meeting resistance. Yeah.
read the book.
Yeah, whatever it is. And in some cases, that's truly what it is. It's just a no, for whatever reason, no, I don't want to do this. But what I've learned through my years of experience and what this, impact project and my work with this nonprofit helped me really do was like really zoom in and get to the roots of like the behavior of what we're seeing and start to just curiously explore the why behind it. And so what I started discovering is like more often than not, it's actually not the will gap. It's not that they don't want to do the thing. It's more in the knowledge or skill area. So the knowledge gap is focused on like, I don't know what to do. And so whatever we're seeing in the classroom, whether it's the kid who's just sitting there or the kid who puts his head down or the kid who's talking or cracking a joke or distracting their friends around them, whatever it is, it may seem like avoidant or attention seeking in nature, but what it really is like they don't actually know what to do. Maybe the directions weren't super clear, or maybe they were very clear, but maybe they have processing delays or they have challenges processing verbal directions. So like they're not actually sure what was said or what they're supposed to do, or maybe like executive functioning skills are a part of their neurodiversity. So like maybe it's a part of
Mm,
their disability where like actually initiating the task is like the biggest challenge for them. And so that might present as like they're sitting there and they're like, I don't know what to do. The skill gap goes a little bit beyond that. And it's like, hey, I know what to do. I process the directions. I know what I'm supposed to be doing. I don't know how to do it. And this is where we may see this show up more in like the content specific areas of like the actual skill that we're asking them to do. They don't know what it is. It's not that they haven't been taught it, but maybe it just hasn't been learned the way we believe it has or the way we want. I know, with my population with ninth graders, like there's a lot that we expect ninth graders to know by the time they get to high school, and that's just not the reality. And so like especially with the neurodiverse population I work with, it's really exploring which kids have the necessary skills, which ones don't, where are these gaps that are preventing access to learning. Um, and I think for me, I think back to my own experiences, I've had to get here the hard way. Like I've had to learn by having those moments, and I feel confident that I'm not alone here. There's a lot of us. If we've been in this long enough, we've all had these experiences where we reflect back, and it's like we learn more context, and it's like, oh, if I had known, maybe I wouldn't have said it, or I wouldn't have said it this way, or I would have maybe tried to like connect with this kid differently, or maybe I would have just given them a break and given them some space today and tried again tomorrow. And you have enough of those experiences. It's typically rooted in that like what I'll just call like a stubborn perspective or a stubborn mindset of like that will gap. The kid just doesn't want to get there. It's my job to get him there. And so like I had to have those own growth experiences myself where I've reflected enough and had to like come
You
back
mean
to it.
this the stubbornness stemming from us as the professionals in the classroom when you say that?
I
Did I
yeah,
interpret that correctly?
speaking from
Okay.
my own experiences, like I don't want to say this is necessarily anybody else, but I know for me, sometimes I've been kind of rigid and stubborn
Right.
in my
Okay.
thinking, and then I've had to come back and kind of look at it through a different lens.
So not the stubbornness of the children, the
Mhm.
students, the adult who isn't opening whatever eyes or whatever door is necessary.
Yeah.
Gotcha. Okay.
I have a couple quick follow-up questions, but then I'll let you keep rolling because I don't want to have you pump the brakes here.
No, you're good.
Um, when we get into the will gap, is
Hmm.
there falling into that realm? Can that be the sort of family stuff going on, or girlfriend broke up with me, boyfriend broke up with me, or losing a parent, like that kind of stuff that where if we're not curious and not understanding what their lives are, would that fall into the will category? Like, is there somewhere you'd put that?
Yeah, that's a great question. And that's exactly where I believe that lives, right? Because the like a refusal to, you know, and take any step that a teacher's asking a student to take, it's rarely just a flat out no, just because no. Like,
Mm,
yeah, there
Mm-hmm.
typically is some deeper stuff. And that's where, like you said, that curiosity of like being willing to explore what could be going on at home. It could be as simple as like you haven't established a relationship with this kid
oh my
yet,
God. Yeah.
and they don't trust you enough
Yeah.
to move
Closed
forward.
off
Like,
and yeah.
If you don't
yeah.
mind, I want to give like an anecdote. Like I have a challenge of I teach semester courses and an AB schedule. So I only see kids for 4.5 months every other day. So when January turns over and I get new kids, and we had a lot of snow days and we had like some holiday time off, it realistically took me more than 4 weeks to like start to gauge even some of the needs that some of my kids had because I only saw them one day a week for a couple weeks at a time. And I just made assumptions of like what they were able to do, and I can think directly to some skill gaps where I just completely thought some students I have were capable of something, and I had to recognize like, oh, like I need to meet them better because I have every level too, like across the
Yeah.
spectrum from AP level students to kids with IEPs or
Mhm.
neurodivergent, and
Mhm.
that will gap is a big thing too. I pride myself on doing a great job of building a rapport with kids, but that doesn't mean I build one with everyone. And I have this one student who this semester has not been showing up to class, and when I talked to their case manager, the case manager said like, "Yeah, she just says she doesn't like you," and it was hard for me to not be offended by that.
Mhm.
But when I talked to this person, it made me realize really what was going on was we were doing a presentation. The student missed it. She was terrified of doing this. She's new to the school district. There's all of these
Mhm.
pieces of the story I just didn't know. And another through line we always come back to is this idea of curiosity. And after having a conversation with that case manager, that adult who the student trusted, and then I think the case manager relayed some of that back. I've now seen that student 3 days in a row. They've popped into office hours. We're making great
Mhm.
progress, but
Oh,
it took
wonderful.
us it took a solid 6 weeks though. I mean, this
Yeah.
wasn't something that was like I solved it in an issue and it's still a work in progress. And when we Anthony talked on the phone 3 weeks ago,
Mhm.
um, I wasn't at this turnaround yet. So it's actually nice to
Mhm.
think that there's forward progress. But like that's one example of a student that came to mind, and where meeting kids where they're at, being curious, giving them grace, like that.
Mhm.
You talk about that rigidity. I think there's a lot of times where I'm sort of rigid in my expectations, but like the art of teaching and the challenge of teaching is it is a challenging job with so many different needs, so many different human beings, so many different stories, so many different knowledge, skill, and will gaps. And
Mhm.
it really is our job to not be perfect because we can't be, but to meet all of them. So I'll let you keep going.
Yeah, I guess my question to help Anthony keep going is for listeners out there, whether it's the knowledge, the skill, or the will, what have you done, right? Because I think that's a huge part of our podcast is trying to jump from theory to practice, understanding that theory is important, but what are some tangible things that you've had success with, Anthony, in any of those domains to close gaps, open doors, whatever
Mhm.
euphemism you want to use?
Yeah, for sure. That's a great question. And Dave, like I'll say what, something that you said you did is like that's for teachers that like aren't in the world of special education, right? Who have hundreds of students and the class sizes are only growing, right? And so those challenges in itself of like how do you make connections with all of those kids,
It's
or at the
hard.
very least help all of those kids feel seen and valued and like recognized in your space and safe enough to take healthy risks. Like what you did, Dave, of just showing up with curiosity and leveraging the adult resources that you have, of like checking in with that kiddo's go-to person just to learn more. That person, it sounds like, was maybe the bridge that helped you kind of like connect with this student and
Not
kind of make
maybe,
that turn.
definitely. It was a
Yeah.
100%. That's what fixed it. Yeah.
hmm And that, so like, I mean, that for me is that's a big resource to leverage, like the collaborative nature of our role. Like we don't, or our roles as educators, like we don't often have a lot of that time to intentionally collaborate, but there has got to be, if you're struggling with a
Hmm.
student, there's for sure other teachers on your team that are struggling with that student too, I
Yeah.
imagine. But there's also got to be at least one. There's got to be somebody, maybe they
Yeah.
don't have a strong connection yet, but they got something. Maybe they get just a little bit more out of that student in class for whatever reason. And just that curiosity of like picking their brain, like what is it that they do? What is it that they don't do? Little things like that. I'll say for me, something that has always stuck with me, and it was, gosh, I think this is probably going back to our Kutztown days, Dave, like of like professors that I had. There was something that was said about like you have to earn the right to discipline a kid.
Oh, I
Like you
like
have
that.
to earn that respect early on. So like, and I will say again, like because of the nature of my role, like I teach a resource intervention block that has this year, like it's less than 20 kids at most, and there's like a rotation. So I have a much smaller class size. I also co-teach two different humanities like content areas, but like the stuff that I do in my resource intervention block is stuff that I know does come with the privilege of having like a smaller crew. But so much of the time I spend early on in the year is really building the climate of what it means to be in my class, what what we do and what we don't do in the class. Um, but specifically like just trying to get to know them early on, by giving them different creative ways to express themselves and share things that they want to share, whether it's like a little intro survey, whether it's games. I know you guys have talked in the past on like episodes of like different like stuff to open the year to help build those relationships. For me, something that's also really important is like non-contingent like praise and reinforcement and attention. Like randomly like connecting with a kid in the hallway outside of the classroom just to talk as humans and like just check in with them.
Yeah.
Or like when a kid stops outside the door and talks for a couple of minutes before they walk in. It's stuff that's not academically related at all. Even the stuff like when you have those few moments, with like the first few minutes of class, last few minutes of class, and you get to like just ask questions by
Yeah.
nature. That stuff I've found, like those little informal moments just really create space where even if not a lot is said, there are these, seeds that are planted of
Yeah.
like, oh, maybe this person actually cares about me as a human and doesn't just see me as
This is
a
all
student in their
targeting
class.
that
Hmm.
the will, right, of the three domains you that our title will be. This is all going after will, correct? In terms of
I
strength and will.
Yeah, that's a great like follow-up question because for me, I look at it as like this threshold of differentiation because like I like the school that I work in, we have like a positive behavior intervention system, like lots of schools
Hmm.
do. Um, and so for me, this threshold of differentiation for my neurodiverse kiddos, like I want to be clear about when I see like undesired behavior take place in the classroom, what is a manifestation of their disability and what is clearly like an active choice they're making. And so by me getting to know them personally, I also a lot of the work I do with them is helping them learn about their brains and the way their brains work and their learning styles. And so as I kind of get to know that through just um different just learning experiences in the classroom because this happens over time, like we're talking in
Right.
March now, I only know what I know about these kids because it's been stuff that I've been doing with them since August.
Mhm.
And it's just these micro moments sometimes. But I'm ultimately trying to find that differentiation threshold because then I can tell when something truly is showing up as like what there's resistance here that's not typically here. And it might just be a shift in body language, might be facial expression, but that intentional effort early on helps me kind of identify what would fall in that will gap. And then anything that really doesn't, that's where I get to be curious about like, hey, what's holding you up here? Like, what is it? And then hopefully by investing in that early on, like there's enough safety and trust that they open up and will share a little bit too.
Do you view the will, skill, and knowledge as something that is generally an order of operations, where you have to address A, then B, then
Mhm.
C, or is it uh, like a circle, a pie chart, where it's
Mhm.
just on a linear level and they're all equal?
Yeah, that's a great question. I would say it's different for every kid. There are
Okay.
some kids that like you can follow a linear progression, make sure they know what to do, make sure they know how to do it, and then beyond that, there's probably something else going on. And then in others, it's like it could just be all over that chart,
Okay.
and it could vary based on the day, it could vary
Okay.
based on the time of day. Like that's what there's so much. And again, like my lens is typically through that neurodiversity. So like there's so much that it could be at any given point of the day. So yeah, that's a great question. Like how to look at it, because that's something I haven't actually like necessarily thought about.
So, Anthony, you sent me two different graphics, and I feel like you've painted the picture really well for us. I think it's um, the premise I think will resonate with any teacher who's listening. The
Mhm.
first graphic you sent was just, and I'll in post production I'll show this. It was, actually I'll pull it up again so I can see. It was it says identifying the gaps, and there's a picture that says knowledge gap, skill gap, and will gap. Knowledge gap is in quotes, it says I don't know that. Skill gap is I don't know how to do that, and the will gap is I don't want to do that. So I think
Hmm.
that graphic will help our listeners, and I'll say that. But I'd like you to talk about, you also shared something that says the path forward. And I feel
Mhm.
like this gives what looks like a pretty clean framework
Mhm.
for maybe implementing this mindset shift. Do you want to talk through that? And I will have this displayed for those who are watching instead of listening.
Yeah, for sure. Yes, this is something that I just looked at through the lens of like social emotional learning recovery. And there's like, little notes that like in this, post-pandemic educational world, you know, I know it just by nature, a lot of schools wanted to move into the the path move down the path of academic recovery, and rightfully so. Really focusing on like closing that skill gap and those knowledge gaps. But then for me and the work that I do, it felt like there was a lot being left behind about like what kids experience, what we as educators experienced during the pandemic, and what was going to get brought into school for the next few years. And I personally still feel like we're experiencing that too. We're still living in that even a few years later. So for me, it's like that first step is like, now what? Like, so you encounter that bump in the road. The bump in the road is like the undesired behavior where you could easily just jump to that mindset of just like they don't want to do the thing,
Just get
or you can
frustrated
just
and close
yeah,
down yourself. It's like
yeah, for real. And
you
that's
do
a
what they
human
do, but as an
reaction.
adult.
For sure, for sure. And like I said earlier, like we've all been there. And
Yeah.
so it happens enough times where it's like you kind of catch yourself and bring yourself back. So it's like, okay, here we are. Like, and for me, it takes a couple of times where it's like, gosh, I feel like I'm like butting heads with this kid. Like, what is it?
Yeah.
And so
Oh
it's just
gosh.
that
You
moment
nailed
of
it.
curiosity. That's right where you are. So it's that awareness that starts it all. And then so Dave, you brought it up before. It's like that collaboration. So it's like, how can you share what's happening with you and like connect with your colleagues, the other people who teach these kids? So it's like, you can and on with some kids that you work with, like maybe you're the one who is like the success story. Maybe you're the one that like got in there and you maybe broke through that protective wall, but you're the one that they love going to your class, and that's the one they the most engaged, and you have stuff to share. So it's that just seeking out ways to collaborate, and also like this is a great time to connect with parents. Like they're such strong stakeholders, and like, and the reality is like nobody knows a kiddo like their parents do. So like they often could just be ones where it's like, hey, actually, there's some stuff going on at home, and that's how
Yeah.
you learn it. Um, and then so like that's where like now you get the collaboration. You find out what works, what doesn't work. Also, like this is where the kids can be the biggest stakeholders here, where it's like if you have enough of a connection with a kid to like even just get that conversation going, that's a big step. But like Dave, the experience that you brought up earlier, that case manager was the bridge. They were able to relay for both you and the student
Yeah.
what the other was experiencing. So that in itself creates the opportunity to keep moving and keep moving forward. And that's where you start to see the mindset shift. So it's as educators, how can we help other educators? Like the resource itself, the graphic is focused on like educators coaching other educators, but in reality, it's like how can we help each other? How can we help ourselves um, see below the surface of those behaviors? So it's all about getting to the root cause because that's when the true intervention takes place. And so that's when it's like if it's a knowledge gap, then you're talking about maybe office hour sessions, right? It's some of these gap closing opportunities that schools naturally have um, that help just kind of help kids kind of build the just the background necessary knowledge that they need, or it could be specific skills. And again, office hour sessions, which I also see as an opportunity to build those relationships that again help you identify that like differentiation threshold. But it's ultimately about like getting to the root cause because once you get below the surface, you identify the root cause of whatever is causing the manifestations of those behaviors in the classroom. That's when you can like really go to work.
As the sort of listener stand in this conversation, and thank you so much, Anthony, for all these ideas. My head's swirling around right now.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's very easy in this profession to get overwhelmed, right? There's so many kids, there's so many different needs, and you have this almost like paralysis that sets in. But pulling something that Dave mentioned about reaching out to the case manager of a student he was having difficulties connecting with, I'm just wondering, as listeners, particularly teachers that are listening to this, or honestly, to be honest, human beings, where you
Mhm.
might be butting heads with another human being, where if
Mhm.
you think to yourself, okay, like what are the two names, one name, two names, three names that just pop in your head as far as a student who's giving you difficulty that you feel like you're butting heads, it's not working. And I think, maybe a challenge out there to all listeners is even if it's just one, right? Just that one kid, try to take some steps and figure out, reach out to the other teachers that person has until you find the one where they're like, oh, they're like that for you. And
Mhm.
it's just like, I feel like if you're able to like make that one bridge or those two bridges with those kids, the other kids in the class are going to probably pick up on that.
Hmm.
Mhm.
Hey, like, John and Anthony always, John was always like rude to Mr. Brown, but now I see like kids are smart. They pick up on that stuff. So I feel
Mhm.
like that's like a challenge out there um, that
Cody,
I want to
you
do myself. And I would imagine would have just this ripple effects of positivity in your classroom and school.
I was to say you actually this episode hasn't aired yet, but the next episode that we have that will air is all about the idea of belonging, which ties to this
Mhm.
so well. And Cody, you brought up something in that episode that I loved. You said in beginning of the year surveys, you sometimes have a question where kids list like a trusted adult in the building,
Yep.
Mhm.
which I think that connects so well to this. Um, I mean, it's just such a great practice, and you're
Right.
right. It
Because if you're
might be
having the
that,
issue, you can go. Now, some kids leave that blank, right?
yeah,
So then it makes it a little bit harder and you have to be a bit of a Sherlock
yeah.
Holmes. But I was watching this YouTube video earlier today or yesterday, and there's something about like celebrities and having their old teachers surprise them or vice
Mhm.
versa. Uh, and I'm thinking, oh, what student of mine is going to be a celebrity one day? That'd be pretty cool. But it got me thinking about the fact that the reality is every teacher isn't going to work for every student. I don't know if that's like a popular opinion or something that people want to hear, but I don't want to lie, right? Like it's
Mhm.
not going to work for every person and every single adult. But the cool thing is I feel like as you become an adult, if you have just like one or two over your course of your entire educational career that was that person for you, that was a pivot point, an inflection point in your life, that we don't have to bat 100, right? Like you actually have to hit a very low percentage of that, because if you just had that one or two teachers, hopefully you have more, right? But I feel like you break through and you make that impact. And so much of Anthony, what you're talking about, I feel like really leads me to believe that you probably are that teacher for many of your students. And that's a kudos to you, and hopefully our listeners can take it to heart.
And
Thank
Anthony,
you,
in
man.
wrapping up, I don't know, did you get to say the piece about the final step? So you have that shift, the mindset shift, and then on the graphic says social emotional learning recovery. I don't know
Mm.
if you closed that out fully yet.
Yeah, yeah. Also, yeah, just thank you, Cody. I'll say like I strive to be that educator. And I'd like to hope that there's been some in the past 14 years that might say that. Um,
I'm sure
so
there
yeah,
are.
so thank you. Yeah, I imagine most of us that's why we get into this work is because we want to make a difference. We want to make an impact on a kiddo's life. So yeah, the social emotional learning recovery for me, it's really just about, you know, right now maybe like I work for a school that has a social emotional like curriculum model, and it's something that is also something that gets spread across the country in other schools through how our school operates. So like social emotional learning is naturally weaved into like the fabric of who we are. A lot of school districts, like I said, they had to just dive into the academic recovery. So now it's like, how can we as the educators just start to just be intentional about pouring into students to help bridge
Mm-hmm.
that social emotional learning gap?
Mhm.
And so for me, a lot of it is about just like modeling. A lot of it is modeling what we want to see from our students. And so like that could look like emotional, regulation, or shifting from a place of like emotional dysregulation into a state of
Yeah.
regulation. That
You
could
could
look
do
like
Dr.
repair
Gaius's thing,
work.
Dave, right?
I was
From our
literally
episode
thinking
a
of that.
couple
Literally
episodes
thinking of
ago. You
that.
could
Yep.
model like literally that model.
Yeah.
Mhm.
I was thinking of Tom Stecker too, who's a big influence on both Cody's and my career. Speaking on for myself, he's I would say the best teacher I ever had in my life, which is funny because I didn't have him in high school, but he might be the most influential teacher I ever had, and I had him
As an
when I
adult.
was 25 or
Mhm.
26 years old.
Yeah.
And he was like one of the first major inflection points in my teaching career that really shifted a lot of how I do what I do.
Mhm.
And I feel like Anthony, I mean, I agree with the sentiments that Cody said. Obviously, there's tons of kids who you've impacted, and obviously you've shared, I think, a lot of great little mindset shifts, but also some practical things that our listeners can do. This has been awesome talking, and I feel like we could keep going. Do you have a closing thought or a closing wish for our listeners, or anything to add before we wrap this up?
Yeah, for sure. I would say I'll leave with this, like, you know, if you find yourself in that like kind of like resistance zone, um, maybe just take a step back and reshape what success looks like for that kid, and find
Mm,
smaller ways that you can positively reinforce them, even if it's something that may not seem age appropriate, right? The amount of things sometimes that I reinforce my ninth graders for are not necessarily things that we would be expecting ninth graders to like be building those skills still, right? So it's like it may seem to teachers like, no, they should know how to do this by now, or like that's an elementary school, thing. Like, no, sometimes it's not. Sometimes maybe we just got to reshape what success looks like and just start to put a spotlight on it, highlight it. Hey, I noticed like you kept your head up all class today. Like that showed me like you were more engaged than I've seen you in a while. I just want you to know I notice it and I appreciate it. Like something like that
Yeah,
could just shift something. And then
totally.
maybe that just is a catalyst for more.
Well, I'll definitely reinforce that nothing in my teaching career has paid more dividends than being curious and giving kids grace. And it's sort of a mantra I live by. So, Anthony, Cody and I both appreciate the work you're doing, and we appreciate you hopping on here to share it with other people. And to our listeners, thank you for listening again to Authentic Educators, a podcast for teachers by teachers about best lessons, favorite classroom moments, and ideas you can use today. Easy for me to say, am I right? Anthony, thank you so much. And we look forward to having people listen to this.
Yeah, thanks, guys.